Welcome back. My name is Asli Suner. I'm one of the NAHR ambassadors and contributors to this book that we are celebrating today. I was the editor of this book, of this chapter, Rock and Stone, that we'll get to explore in the next hour. I think I'm joined today by our authors, by our fellow contributors, and we'll get to discuss, hopefully, some of the details and stories that were introduced in this chapter. The images you see on the screen now are all from the book, and they were captured in and around Valteleggio, which is, as we described in the previous hour, our home to NAHR and our eco-laboratory, where the field observation actually happens, and they are basically telling stories and journeys across the deep time and around the planet, and they are in fact ongoing stories of the plays of lives and interactions entangled in their plot lines and ultimately of Earth. I was especially interested and happy to be presenting as the first chapter, although this is not the first chapter in the book, because Rock basically provides framework that encompasses a long view perspective into past and into future. And it is very much aligned with the philosophy of NAHR, as we described a little bit in the previous hour, that also aligns itself with this quote by Aldo Leopold in Thinking Like a Mountain, because in short, it provides a view or a statement that tells us that we should adapt the mountain's view that has the deep time and wide-eyed perspective over intricate interdependence of all life forms. Maybe you can change to the next slide.
Yeah, it is. It takes a minute.
Sorry. So as I was saying, this chapter is all about the stories that rocks tell us, and one of the stories we read in this chapter in the local essay written beautifully by a geologist, Stefania Kabassi, who unfortunately isn't here today, is about what rock remembers. It basically tells us what's held in the alpine memory through the geologic time over a long journey from marine basin to the mighty mountain range as we recognize it today. In the next slide.
Yeah. Sorry, it takes a second to. Gee, not that. Asli.
Yeah. Other stories that are basically entangled with this deep journey of the alpine memory is basically how these mountain building happened, also gave shape to the stratification of the rocky landscape around our eco-laboratory and how that actually informed the cultures of making and the material culture, as we see in these images and in the Valtaleggio area, dispersed in the landscape in a very harmonious way. Next, please. As we were reading these stories back in 2017, we actually got to experience to build a dialogue ourselves, accompanied by our very valuable mentor, Master Alessandro Mendini. We together collectively with the fellows together collaborating on building this stone carpet. This was a process that engaged all senses, and it was a collaboration not only amongst the people who kind of participated in this stone carpet building, but also a collaboration with the rock, with the stone itself. This basically requires a dialogue, a correspondence with the material, with the rocky setting. And this dialogue was then further explored by our fellow artists at the time through poetry, through film, photography, performance, and paintings and illustrations that were all inspired through these dialogues and correspondence with rock. Next, and finally, also as we all experience, we know that not all our dialogues in our contemporary lives are as poetic or artistic. We actually have come to kind of settle on a relationship with rock that is not a dialogue, but invasive, as a force that now let us call this age as Anthropocene, as the human age. And our next presenter, who is the author of the global essay in this chapter, actually concentrates on this type of interrelationship that we have come to build with our rocky earth. And I think I can leave the word to Joshua without further delay to walk us through his essay.
Thank you, Asla. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to try pull up this presentation. How does this look? Can everybody see this?
Yes.
So my task for the book was to try to draw some connections from Valtaleggio to a global scale of thinking about rock and stone. For me, I think that was important to do that through my own experience, through some kind of personal locality as well. But I think it was nice to, start by number one, zooming in and trying to understand this place, Valtaleggio, which is a part of a larger valley called Val Brembana, which is important, and I'll get to that in a second. But one of the things that we were all kind of as residents there, we were all expected to wander through the hills, wander through the mountains. And, as you're walking, of course, everything seems bucolic, and we've talked about the importance of being immersed in nature. But of course, like it's inescapable to find moments and landscapes of extraction inside what at first might seem to be a relatively untouched type of ecosystem. And so it's like you catch a glance of something like you can see here kind of in the center, some little aberration that doesn't quite look like the landscape around it. And of course, that turns out to be a true site of extraction. In this case, it's a marble quarry. And I think it reveals something that at first this might seem like an anomaly, but then maybe this is more accurately a glimpse of some larger economic substrate of the mountains. That the underlying strata, the material and economic logics extend the human mineral interface beyond just the harmonious aesthetics of how we construct local architecture. And it really connects us to deposits that span the globe, but also financial networks that span the globe. And for me, there was like this particular interesting connection to the fact that the marble that's being quarried in Val Brembana, just next door to Valtaleggio, makes its way across the globe to Los Angeles. So there's a neighborhood in Los Angeles called Sun Valley. And this is, I think, the twinning of these two different valleys, one that sits in the mountains, and in the Alps, a kind of alpine landscape, and the other, which is called Sun Valley, but in Los Angeles, if anybody knows Los Angeles, Sun Valley is basically like the industrial hinterlands of Los Angeles. It's flat. There's no trees. Everything is paved, and it's effectively a kind of logistics and material depot for the larger metropolis. So to number one, understand through kind of geological paradigm the fact that these two landscapes are somehow folded one into the next by the literal displacement of material from one landscape to the other, I think is a particularly important way of understanding what rock and stone have to offer us in the contemporary world, especially when we're thinking about just the term that Asli mentioned, the Anthropocene, a term that comes from geological thinking. So actually maybe like another geological term that I think is nice to bring in here is the term a glacial erratic. So a glacial erratic is any stone that has found its way to a different landscape by motion of the glaciers, right? So it seems almost like an invasive species in mineral terms. And I think that there's something analogous happening in contemporary society where we have what I would call supply chain erratics, which is what we would see on the right side here. These objects, artifacts, or almost like small portions of a larger landscape that get displaced. In this case, something from the European continent that slides through the Straits of Gibraltar, makes its way across the Atlantic, through the Panama Canal, and ultimately onto the California tectonic plate to arrive here in Los Angeles. And like I said, Sun Valley is a very, very different landscape. This seems to be the landscape that lays bare its logic. While it might be the logic of economy, supply chains might be hidden in Val Brembana and Valtaleggio, here in Los Angeles, there's no denying it. There's no looking in a different direction. you're confronted with this logic at every step. And I think that the degree to which the landscape has been sculpted actually appears nicely in this geological map of Los Angeles. You know, we want to read this as all being natural deposits. If we zoom in a little bit, we can see that some of these brown seams that run through the larger landscape. Again, this is just a map that's produced by geologists. So it's only documenting deposits of material that are deemed to be geological. And what we see here is these dark brown lines. If you look closely, you can see that they're interrupted by the street grid of the city. And what we realize is that this is the kind of mounding, the berming that has taken place to support the elevated freeways of Los Angeles. So as a geologist, not that I'm a geologist, but that as geologists look at the city, they can't look away from what has already been sculpted, and I could say terraformed in the landscape. You can see in yellow also, these are some of the pits and quarries that are a part of the aggregate mining industry in Sun Valley. And then this is a different way of looking at some of the same information. If you were to just take a digital terrain map, basically a digital scan of the Los Angeles area, you can see here the sculpting in positive terms, the addition of geological fill that we have brought to the landscape to support our freeways, and then also the subtractive version of that. And we can, that kind of addition versus subtraction that we see right here is also quite telling, that we are literally displacing material from one part of the landscape to another. And this is what it looks like. This is very close to an area that I move through every day, close to the university where I teach. And you know, we can see exactly what that new geological landscape looks like. All of this, you know, an incredible amount of displaced materials and minerals. And what I think was interesting for me then was to try to look at that in some more specific terms. So number one, to try to just map all of the moments of the dimension stone industry. So dimension stone being the types of extractive processes we use for stone that in some way is whole. It's in cubes, it's in panels or slabs. It's used mostly for architectural purposes, but not only. And so here the kind of purple circles, anything that's a purple circle is a part of the dimension stone industry. And on the left in Italy and on the right in California. So, and we can understand that in some cases, there's literal material connections with mines and quarries that might exist in Italy, and then stone yards where some of that marble might end up being distributed for people to take back to their residential landscapes to appear as a granite countertop or some other marble in their house, in their yard. The orange plus symbols and minus symbols, those are a different type of industry. That's the aggregate industry, so directly connected to concrete. And we have both of those industries in both of these locations. While the dimension stone industry is a literal movement of material from Italy to Los Angeles, the concrete and asphalt industries, I would call those parallel movements, where the movement of aggregate that flows out of the mountains in Italy is parallel to the same thing happening in Los Angeles. And this happens across the globe. Basically, anywhere you've got proximity to a city of a certain size that might be in a mountainous area, usually there's an alluvial fan of geological material that's being displaced by water, slowly eroded and moved downstream, that finds its way into the plains just outside that mountain range. And that is usually an area where you'll find pretty intense extractive activity. So this is going back to Italy again. This is right next door to Valtaleggio. It's a hugely important kind of facet of this landscape, is the way that it is used as a part of the concrete, and also the lime industry. So basically limestone that is then quarried and turned into lime and cement. And I think I was also interested in trying to find out, like, okay, what is the scale of that operation? We talk about the Anthropocene as if humans are affecting the landscape more than natural geological processes. So is there a way to quantify that? And in this particular case, I wanted to find out how much export of geological material is Italy engaged in, and how does that compare with, let's say, the quote unquote export of geological materials that Mount Vesuvius might launch into the air and the atmosphere. And in this case, after doing some calculations, I could find that in 2018, Italy exported 0.8 million cubic meters of dimension stone, compared to 10 million cubic meters of lava and ash discharged in the most recent eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 1944. At this rate, it would take the stone industry 12.5 years to expel the same amount of geological material as that single eruption. But of course, Mount Vesuvius only erupts on average 50 years, which means that at the current rate of export and eruption, Italy's dimension stone is quadrupling the output of the volcano. I think that's just a fact to reckon with. What's even more complicated is that export of stone is a very complicated one. So the United States actually is one of the largest importers of Italian marble, but it is simultaneously the largest exporter of marble to Italy. And the reason for that is that the kind of prestige of Italian marble is so significant, and some of the loopholes in the nomenclature of what can be called Italian marble, that at this point there are countries, especially Iran, Turkey, Namibia, Brazil, that are sending marble to Italy where it can be finished and then sent back to the country of origin and labeled as Italian marble. So I think at this moment then, where we see that we're moving these geological deposits not only once across the globe, but multiple times across the globe, really complicates our way of thinking about what these supply chains are producing across the planet. And then I think it's important to reckon with that idea of the planetary. What does it mean when we start thinking about things not only in terms of the circuits of supply chains, but also the way that literally manifests on the face of the planet? And I would say on the face of the planet, but also in the atmosphere. One of the things that you very quickly discover when you're researching some of this type of mineral activity is that it moves very, very directly and very quickly from the lithosphere, from the planet itself, the surface of the planet, to the atmosphere. And one very important way is thinking about literally just some of the activities of the concrete industry. So some facts and figures that we literally tend to burn the limestone that we extract from the earth so that we can turn it into either lime or cement. And for each ton of cement that is produced, almost 1 ton of carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. And that 1-to-1 ratio, I think, is a terrifyingly simple image. So even though buildings are not made solely of cement, if we could imagine our cities as vast geological accumulations of minerals, we can picture their airborne mineral doppelgangers floating above the city in the atmosphere. And we typically like to imagine the release of liquid hydrocarbons from deep within the earth into atmospheric carbon as one of the primary contributors to a warming planet. But we find that just the construction industry is doing something similar at a similar scale. And so how do we maybe use the language, the paradigm of the geological to start to think through some of these, I'd say, challenges and struggles that we're inside of. An architect, Kyo Mo, looks at a planetary way of understanding the mobilization of minerals, of materials for the construction of the Empire State Building in New York. He maps that literally across something that looks like a planet. And I've been engaged in a similar set of issues of almost representational strategies to try to think through how this geological mindset might change the way we think about just everyday objects. To imagine that maybe on the other side of exploitation, in search of a post-extractive world, could the language of geology and the past sins, let's say, of that discipline become more productive for our current agenda? Could the particular skills of that discipline somehow be trained to undo some of the damage done? And could this tendency to envision the world as one which is made for human consumption help to reveal the connections between any seemingly natural or artificial artifact and its site of extraction, understand better its transition from a specific material formation into a generic fungible commodity, basically transforming specific materials into commercial products. And so one way that I was trying to look at that was to take existing architectural objects. We know that we can kind of like visualize those as just a kind of quantity sheet of all of the different embodied materials. But would there be another way that really thinks through not just those materials and their quantities, but also the landscapes that they embody as they're reconfigured in new locations, which I think geologists are doing all the time. They're always thinking about not just the types of materials, the deposits, but where those deposits lived in a prior life. So this kind of study to re-envision the Chicago's Monadnock building tries to understand where some of those materials are coming from, these landscapes that have been folded into a new location. So my hope would be that as we think about a kind of new way of thinking about geology in global planetary terms, that we not only think about beautiful mountain ranges, but we think about this vast redistribution of these landscapes and maybe try to hold space for some of the possibility of imagining these new landscapes folded one into the next. And I think I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Josh. This was very thought-provoking, very intriguing. Now, I think we have still quite a bit of time to kind of ponder through these interesting thoughts and ideas. Maybe I can invite you all to jump in and discuss what in the light of what we heard from Joshua about this disposition of landscape through processes of constructions and building materials, the term that Grazia had used when she was defining habitats, she actually used the word geodiversity, and I wonder if this whole disposition adds to the geodiversity that I don't know if Grazia is still here, if this whole disposition of geological material adds to the geodiversity of places. And within that, I think maybe we can reintroduce the question that popped up in the chat in the previous session that was about being native or being invasive in a place. I don't know, maybe you would like to jump in to these questions or concepts about being native, being invasive, or adding to the diversity in terms of this geological disposition. We think about these in terms of, you know, plant material, in terms of people being native to place or being not native to a place, being invasive in a place. But how can we rethink these questions in the context of geological material that we are in many ways entangled with through our making of built environment? If anyone wants to jump in.
I want to say something, Joshua. Hi, Maristella. Though I sit somewhere else now and I'm Italian, which makes a good connection with California, I do work in Los Angeles at the Getty. And I actually, when you introduced this idea of, of the Val Brembana and the Sun Valley, I said, yeah, of course. this marbles get moved from one continent to another continent and so on. And then your section of the Chicago, building with all these levels, layers of different stone, rocks, material, and so on, made me thinking in a different way to the place where I work. I work at the Getty. Now, being from Roma, and being an architect and an architecture historian, actually, I took my students more than once to the quarry from where, and it's a very ancient Roman quarry, it was, from where the travertine, stones was extracted, prepared, new, incredible kind of machineries created, to work the stone, from the travertine quarry, and then moved to Los Angeles. Basically, we have a quarry that it's basically all moved to another part of the planet, and I was quite sad when I heard from other colleagues that at this point, with the big construction of the Getty, basically the old quarry, some of the travertine there were used in the Colosseum, in the ancient Roman fabric. It's closed now because it's exhausted. It doesn't exist any longer. And you think that there is another hill somewhere else that it's built with that. I found, what you said, on one side fascinating, but also on the other side quite scaring. and maybe I'm talking to, it's more than a question. It's just that it came very clear to me, I mean, what you were presenting in your slides. And thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this idea of somehow like the idea of the invasive species and how that translates into the mineral world. Maybe I like the term erratic just a little bit better. It certainly doesn't have a it has less of a moral or value judgment, I think. I mean, of course, I'm also terrified by the scale of these operations, right? And I think maybe there's, one of the things that I also, uncovered in the article is just what it means not only to have the kind of scrambling of materials from one location to another, which also, of course, is a natural geological process, right? Like that is always happening. But it's just that we've accelerated that at an incredible rate. But that also then that scrambling is operating at a different scale in terms of just the entropy, like which is, I would say, when we are, effectively burning limestone into the atmosphere, right? Like that is a very clear form of entropy. And I think for me, as also trained as an architect, inside of a discipline where we imagine that the construction process is one of carefully ordered stacking, keeping materials in very tightly controlled roles. What's interesting is that the construction process is also one of producing a kind of planetary entropy. And so those two things are happening simultaneously, right? And I think that's just what I think we need to kind of continually remind ourselves of and be diligent about unraveling what it means to be doing those two things at the same time. Structuring the way materials come together in very precise ways, and then abandoning ourselves to some version of entropy and actively being the agents of that entropy.
Yeah, I thank you for taking this point. And sorry, oh yes, I agree with it. I also like erratic, though I have to say that I always, in my knowledge, for me, erratic, it's something that it has a meaning from geologists of, I don't know, thousands of years ago. Of course, the so-called erratic. If you have ever been a hiking or person and in some areas, you understand the importance of erratic. But now, what scares me that we make erratic as a kind of practice of distraction, distraction, yeah, which it's different. I understand when you say it's less moral impact. We cannot close our eyes, unfortunately.
I see that. Thank you, Marcella. Sorry to interrupt. I see that in the chat, Ozan has suggested a powerful book on this similar topics. And in our own book, we reference in a couple of times Marcia Breunerud, who is a writer, who is a geologist and then a writer of this of rocks. And in a recent podcast interview, I heard her saying that that we think we are in the human age that we call Anthropocene for all these forces that we have been imposing on Earth. We call ourselves in space age, due to all these technological advances that we are embarking upon. We call ourselves in the artificial intelligence age. But in fact, we are still in the Stone Age, she says, because all of these materials, whether it's the AI, driven through the silicon or the carbon that is in the in all these processes, they're all earthly materials. They're all geologically bound, and in fact we are still kind of shaping and reshaping the stone, the rock, although in a very different scale. And in that light, I also wanted to ask, perhaps for our fellows from Rock and Stone here, Juan, I see Greta, and maybe others to jump in, and Grazia, who actually works directly with the geological material, and maybe speak to like how you, what's your take on this Stone Age? You had, Juan, I know you're working through photography. Greta is a landscape architect. And although we think landscaping more through plant material, it's always grounded to this earthy layer that is very much of that Stone Age that Marcia is referring to. So I'm wondering if any of you would like to jump in and comment on your own experiences, on your own take, how you engage with rock, how you engage with this geological layer that is somehow off the place, or sometimes kind of transported from different locations on Earth.
Hi, I'm Greta.
Hi,
I can
Greta.
try to jump in. Josh, that was a really compelling presentation. Thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you, those of you that I know here. Yeah, I think about rock and stone a lot. I work with it all the time in my profession. It's really, as you're saying, Asla, it's like a lot of people, I think I know rock and stone better than I know my plants sometimes. It's just because of where my background's in architecture too. I find it, I don't have a formulated statement, so this is going to be rambling, but I'm thinking about how I'm using it now, and I work with a firm that's very much tied with sustainability, and how, we're talking about these fairly large concepts, and for me, it's much more palatable and easier for me to break it into an understanding of the practitioner, and to try to think how I can chip away at something that is a global challenge on a really localized scale. If it's trying to meet, local quarries and stone yards, and salvaging stone that is of the place, and thinking about how we can use a supply chain that is within 50 to 250 miles of a site project, instead of shipping material across the world. And there's a lot of, I'm in the Northeast, I live in New York, so this is kind of granite country here. So when we were working with materials, it's understanding the field stone and the bluestone, and there actually are marble quarries. There's a beautiful, maybe you know it, Josh, there's this beautiful marble quarry in Vermont called, I think it's Vermont Quarries or Vermont Stone Art, that's actually a mine. It's inside of a mountain. So if you visit there, which if you haven't been, you should totally go. It's like this cathedral inside, because they're carving the stone out from inside the mountain. And you get to see, one thing that fascinates me about stone is that in its raw form, it's totally different than when you start to slice through it and polish it, or to kind of hammer it, or the way you can change the surface changes its nature. So like as it's experienced and as it comes out of the earth is totally different than what an architect or designer creates from it. So you're sort of transforming that nature is a really fascinating tool to be able to play with as a designer, but also thinking about what a consumer wants. There's a building right near, there's a few buildings like this around. There's one on Yale's campus, and there's one that just opened, this opera house right next to the World Trade Memorial in downtown Manhattan, where they use marble as the facade, and it's a quarter or a half an inch thick, so that light can penetrate through that marble, and it creates this like glowing box, and it's beautiful inside. So the way we transform the material is fascinating. But I also think that, you know, and then the carbon footprint question is really, it's one to reckon with as a designer, because you want to build these beautiful things, and then understanding the implications is a lot to swallow. And the realities are kind of like, you know, the idea that in New York City, if you ship marble from Italy, it is actually probably a lower carbon footprint than if you quarried the stone in Vancouver and brought it on a truck, right? So understanding these differences in the supply chain is fascinating. And concrete is really, I was thinking a lot about concrete at the end of your presentation, Josh, because it's so, concrete is kind of like computer chips, like they're just so ingrained into everything we need that it's like, how do you possibly, and there's so many, you know, so much research going into like alternatives for cement that are lower carbon, and but it's just so intrinsically tied into everything. So it's like, we try to like lower a concrete slab from 8 inches to 4 inches but it's still, you have to get that sand from somewhere, and kind of pulling apart that supply chain, you just learn more and more and more. Anyway, this is my ramble, because I could just keep going, so I'll just stop there and see.
There is
Thank
a
you.
question about if could we stop building, which I guess is a rhetorical but also a pressing question, right, of extractivism and our economy of extraction. But in the case of rocks, is really complex, or the case of extracting. And Greta, now, yes, people, you know, they do tunnels. So we have all these, we don't, from the outside, we still see the mountains. So what we call the environmental impact apparently seems less, but in reality is the same, but we carve inside. So it's quite frightening to drive through landscape and think that our mountains are now hollow. Is yet a different vision that one may start having. And I can imagine a set of drawings that Greta would come up with of these hollow mountain, as she's amazing in drawings. And I also wanted to poke Juando, because many of the photographs we have in the book, I would say not just for the rock and stone, but also in other chapters, but we see you here, is, you know, are yours, Juan. And even though you photograph many things, you spend quite a bit of time photographing our landscape. I don't know if you have any story you want to share, or any impressions about photographing the quarries.
Josh's presentation was very thought-provoking, because I don't think it's in the top of our mind, thinking about, you know, all those massive amount of rocks moving, you know, from one continent to another. And I was thinking, how could you, you know, put that into images? How could you build a story that besides the graphics that were very graphic, of course, how you could put that into images will be a project really interesting to take on. So so yeah, that's what I was thinking about that as I was listening to the presentation. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, these are some of the photos that I just pulled up from a page of the book, or a spread of
I think it's like how that we cannot grasp the geological time, right? That is described in millions of years. That it's hard to really understand in our own, you know, personal views of, you know, 100 years usually of time frames that we can get our heads around. It's, I think, similarly, your Juan is relevant to have a grasp on this giant movement of very large amounts of geological material. How can you capture this so that it becomes something relatable, so it becomes something that we can actually you know, put maybe in images or stories, so that it's available for everyone to ponder about. If once we go to a building, like Joshua was suggesting, to kind of capture not only how beautiful it may be, as Greta said, that we are all after as architects, but what their stories are, what their journeys have been like, and how these journeys have been entangled in many other journeys. Because once, as Marcella was saying, once we hollow out a landscape and kind of reconfigure it as a piece of architecture somewhere else, that left the landscape that's left is still a landscape where lots of habitat is kind of stitched to. Maybe coming back to Mauro's image that we saw, like we were here, it's like the mountain was here, right? Which is now kind of gone, and it leaves a trace, and it leaves this void that lots of different life forms were stitched to. I really wonder if there could be a way, a tool to make these stories more, you know, graspable by a regular, you know, inhabitant of a city, because we are all kind of living under the influence of such entanglements, of such movements.
We got to the hour, Asli.
I think Joshua was
Sorry,
saying
Josh. Yeah.
something to
just
kind
one
of wrap
quick
it up.
comment. The landscape architect Jane Hutton has a really nice concept of reciprocal landscapes, where she imagines that every time that you're designing something for one location, you're simultaneously affecting multiple landscapes. So I think that's a really beautiful. Asli doesn't quite give the idea for the public, but I think at least for designers, the idea that we're designing or shaping multiple landscapes, even though the project may only be one given site, I think is a really nice way of moving forward.
Thank you. I think it's a nice concept leaving this hour with, because I think it speaks to all the coming up chapter discussions. That is reciprocity. I think we can end with this. I want to thank you all very much for joining today, for contributing with your comments and thoughts. I think now we'll move on to our next chapter.
Yeah. Yes, we thank you, Asli.